It's relied on a strategy of passing anti-immigrant laws at state and local levels. And this effort sort of culminated in the passage of Senate Bill 1070 in Arizona a couple of years ago, which would have not only criminalized the undocumented, it would have empowered local police and sheriffs to stop people that they suspected of being undocumented and had state workers check people's immigration status, etc. And so this again led to a large number of protests in Arizona. There was a nationwide boycott of Arizona, and ultimately there was a court suit, and the Supreme Court struck down most of the provisions of the law. And this is basically because legally the federal government has a responsibility for immigration, not state and local governments. Now, in terms of the immigrant rights movement, one of the major demands that emerged out of the mega marches in 2006 was for legalization and against the growing number of deportations. Protesters also opposed workplace repression in the form of expansion of the government E-Verify program and also expansion of guest worker programs. Another very important demand was to stop the militarization of the U.S.-Mexican border. This effort, which actually began under the Clinton administration, has led to hundreds of immigrants dying each year as they're pushed away from crossing in major cities out into trying to cross into the desert. And so I know in the border area, especially in Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, it's a very big demand of the movement to stop the border militarization. Now there's a third tendency that has gotten a lot of media attention, and that is basically the compromise known as Comprehensive Immigration Reform, or CIR. And so what the Comprehensive Immigration Reform, or CIR, tries to do was to pass some kind of immigration reform legislation by combining what the people want, which was legalization, and with what the sort of anti-immigrant movement wanted, which was more militarization of the border, more deportations, and more workplace repression. And then final aspect, which isn't stressed a lot, but is very important, is to combine that with what the corporations really want, which is more temporary workers. CIR bill would have tripled the number of temporary workers from 65,000 to close to 200,000. Legalization of agricultural workers for the farm lobby, and also moving away from family reunification for legal residents to one that's based on education, English speaking, and job skills. And this would in particular be harmful to the bulk of immigrants who are coming from, the bulk of the undocumented who are coming from Mexico and Central America, because they would not qualify or make it more difficult for them to legalize under these conditions. So I think there's two possible criticisms of CIR, which are distinct, although they're distinct. Politically, and this is my own view, I think that the CIR bill that emerged out of the Senate conceded too much to the anti-immigrant forces. It gave away too much to border militarization. It left out millions of undocumented. It's estimated perhaps 8 out of the 12 million undocumented would have qualified under the Senate bill. It would take 10 years for full legalization, and then it would have done things like it would remove the or end the diversity visa. And this would eliminate about half of all the immigrants coming from Africa at this time. And so I personally don't think it's a bill that can be supported. And I think here it's important not to have an attitude of, well, you can never compromise, because I think that's part of life. I think some compromises which fall short of what's needed, like the DACA program, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, can be supported. It's obviously a compromise. It's not a permanent solution. People only have a 2-year stay of deportations. But it doesn't actually make anyone else worse off. And it could better the people's lives. And I think close to 1 million people have signed up under the DACA program so far. But I think the CIR itself is a bad compromise, in the sense it would make millions of undocumented worse off. It would hurt many relatives who would have a harder time immigrating in the future. It would make African immigrants in particular worse off. And it would also increase militarization of the border, workplace enforcement, and the temporary worker program. So that's sort of a political position where I don't actually support the CIR bill that came out of the Senate. Now, there's a distinct or separate issue of the practicality, and that's where I think the comprehensive immigration reform was based on the assumption that Republicans are willing to compromise. And while I think this was true in the Senate, since they did pass a Senate bill, although I think it was too much full of bad stuff to be supported, but there's no evidence that the House Republicans are really willing to compromise. I mean, they even, if you remember, they even went as far as being willing to shut down the government rather than compromise on funding. There was supposed to be a House CIR bill, which was widely thought to be worse than the Senate one, but even that was pulled because all the Republicans who were supposed to be working on it pulled out. And so there isn't any House CIR bill. And if in the last year, only 2 bills have gained Republican support in the House, one of them, which is misnamed the SAFE Act, basically would have rolled all the bad parts of the old H.R. 4437, the Sensen Center bill, with the bad parts of local anti-immigrant laws, such as the Arizona 10b-70. And that actually passed the House Judicial Committee on a straight party line vote. But then I think the House leadership had sensed that it would just get bad publicity if they passed it in the House as a whole. But that, I think, really reflected the true sentiment of a lot of the House Republicans. And then more recently, the House Republicans voted to defund the ICE Immigration and Customs Enforcement Ombudsman's Office. And the Ombudsman, which there may be something here on campus, I mean, basically it's an office that's supposed to deal with people's complaints about how the system is being run. And so basically Republicans say, we don't even want to hear anybody complaining if they were, manhandled when they were arrested or anything like that. We don't even want that. And so I think they're, given that situation, I think that there isn't going to be any immigration reform this year. And if the Republicans make gains in the midterm elections in the fall, which some people say they will, and I'm not an expert on that, then they may not want to do anything afterwards. So what can be done given this situation? One, I think it is very important. A lot of groups are fighting to stop the deportations. There's actually I know one of the groups in California, the National Day Laborers Organizing Network, or NDLON, has called for actions this coming Saturday to protest deportations because the Obama administration has deported more than 2 million undocumented, a record number, and there's hundreds of thousands more being rounded up and deported each year. One way to do this is by expanding the deferred action for childhood arrivals to all undocumented, or some kind of deferred action for all. And I think this would have 2 advantages. One, it would help the undocumented, allow them to again get work, get driver's license, etc. And I think that from a tactical perspective, it could put pressure on the Republicans. I mean, Obama, if he wanted to, could say, okay, I'm doing this, you guys, because you're not doing anything. If you don't pass some kind of immigration reform, then it's going to stay, and then it'll be de facto legalization of everybody. But that's your problem because you don't want to legalize anybody. And then I think the other thing is fights on state and local levels against these anti-immigrant laws, and then to also expand the rights of undocumented. So I know there's been some success of this in California, and I think there's efforts here in Florida. In California, we do have in-state tuition for undocumented youth who have graduated from a California high school, or tuition equity, and we've also won a partial victory in terms of driver's licenses. A bill was passed that's starting 2015. This was passed last year in 2013. So again, I don't know why it had to wait until 2015 to be implemented, but anyway, that's the nature of the compromise. That can get licenses, but one of the problems is, one of the things that local police and sheriffs have been doing is they've been, when they stop somebody who's undocumented and doesn't have a driver's license, they can seize their cars for up to 30 days and charge them like $30 a day impound fee. And so at $900 to $1,000 a car, a lot of people can't afford it, lose their cars. And so actually what happened after the bill was passed is some of the state and, some of the local sheriffs and police actually stepped up this, because it's like, oh, this money is going away in a year and a half, so we better, make hay while the sun is shining and try and bust even more undocumented drivers. So I know there's also a struggle going on to try and stop this practice, because the 30-day impound is a purely punitive kind of thing, and it's not done in general for anything else. Like you get stopped and ticketed, they don't take your car for 30 days and say, oh, you can't, you have to pay $1,000 to get it back. So anyway, so those are some of the local things, and I think I'll stop there, because I know people are going to talk more about that and know more about that.
Thank you so much. So, just to recap what Professor Masal was saying, again,